6 weeks. That's what the whiteboard in the RL conference room said the Monday my whole life got rearranged again. 6 weeks until the biggest anniversary issue in the magazine's 40-year history hit the stands. And not one person in that building knew I'd be spending every single one of those weeks trying not to fall apart in front of a woman I'd built an entire personality around forgetting. I should probably back up. My name is Ren. I'm the senior style assistant at Orel, and up until that Monday, my biggest problem was convincing the photo director that Neon was, in fact, coming back. I'd worked there for 3 years, answering emails at midnight, memorizing which editors took oat milk and which ones would fire you for suggesting it, telling myself every single day that the plan was working. The plan being, never think about the wedding that didn't happen. Never think about the dress still hanging, tags on in the back of my closet like evidence from a crime scene. I was good at the plan. I want that on record, because it makes what happened next feel even more unfair. That Monday, our editor-in-chief called an all-staff meeting at 9 a.m., which never happens unless someone got fired or the building's on fire, so naturally everyone showed up terrified and holding coffee like a shield. She tapped the mic twice like she always does, and said the words that ended my streak of emotional stability. I'd like you all to welcome Orel's new editorial director. I remember thinking, okay, fine, new boss. I can handle a new boss. I have survived 4 editors, 1 rebrand, and a period where the whole office briefly believed in crystals. I could survive this. Then the door opened. I want to be very clear that I did not gasp. I did not drop my coffee. What I did do was go completely, unnaturally still, the way you do when you see a shape in the dark and your brain hasn't decided yet if it's dangerous. Because walking through that door, in a coat that probably cost more than my rent, hair shorter than I remembered, expression exactly as composed as it had been the last time I saw her, was Adrienne. The last time I saw her, for the record, was through a car window, in a dress I never got to wear all the way through the ceremony. The Adrienne. The one whose name I'd trained my mouth not to say out loud. The one who, 3 years ago, sent one text message that said, "I'm sorry, I can't," and then disappeared so completely that even her own cousin blocked me when I asked questions. She scanned the room the way new bosses do, cataloging faces, and then her eyes landed on mine, and for exactly 1 second, 1 full second I counted, something moved behind them. Not guilt, not quite. Something closer to shock wearing guilt's coat. Then it was gone, and she said, in the same voice she used to say my name in bed, now flattened into something professional and terrifying, "I look forward to working with all of you." I have replayed that sentence more times than I'd like to admit. Here's the part I need you to understand before we go any further. Before I tell you about the show, or the office, or every ridiculous thing that happened after. I am not the kind of person who believes in fate, or signs, or the universe having a sense of humor. I believe in deadlines and dry cleaning and doing your job well enough that nobody asks personal questions. So when I tell you that my ex-fiancée, the woman who left me standing in a church hallway with $300 of flowers and a microphone check, had just become my direct supervisor, I need you to know that I am fully aware of how insane that sounds. I didn't cry in the bathroom, if that's what you're picturing. I went and did something far more mature. I texted my best friend Delphine 4 words. "She's here, she's my boss." And muted my phone before she could send back the 17 voice memos I knew were coming. The meeting ended. People filed out, murmuring about the new hire, about how intimidating she seemed, about a rumor that she used to run creative at a much bigger house before some kind of family thing pulled her away for a few years. Nobody knew the family thing was me. Nobody knew there was a family thing at all, really, because I still didn't fully know it either. That particular piece of the story hadn't been handed to me yet. What I did know was this. I had 6 weeks until the biggest issue of my career, a new boss who used to know exactly how I take my coffee, exactly what made me laugh at 2 a.m, and exactly how it felt to leave without an explanation, and somehow I was supposed to walk into that office every day and act like none of that history existed. Before I get into how spectacularly that went, if you're the kind of person who likes stories where the ex comes back and everything gets complicated in the worst, most satisfying way, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because this one gets so much messier before it gets good. And tell me in the comments, would you have quit on the spot or stayed just to see what she'd say next? Because I stayed. God help me, I stayed. Delphine found me in the supply closet 40 minutes after the meeting, which is not a euphemism. I was genuinely hiding among the reams of printer paper like a woman who'd seen a ghost, because I had in fact seen a ghost, except the ghost had a corner office now, and a lanyard with her name on it. Delphine took one look at my face and said, "Okay, start from the beginning, and don't skip the part where you apparently know our new boss well enough to look like you're about to throw up." So I told her, "Not everything. You don't hand someone the whole wreckage in one supply closet. But enough. The engagement. The wedding that got as far as the flower delivery and the string quartet doing a sound check before it stopped being a wedding and started being the worst afternoon of my life." Delphine, to her enormous credit, did not gasp theatrically or say anything unhelpful. She just went very quiet, which for Delphine is the equivalent of a 5-alarm fire, and finally said, "So your ex-fiancé is now signing off on your performance reviews. Ren, that's not a situation. That's a legal drama waiting to happen." I told her it would be fine. I told her I was a professional, that I'd survived worse, that I could keep my head down for 6 weeks until the anniversary issue shipped, and then quietly transfer to a different department if I had to. Delphine raised one eyebrow in the specific way she does when she thinks I'm lying to myself, which is often, and said nothing else, because the elevator dinged and half our floor came pouring out for the 10 a.m. status meeting, and there was no more time to fall apart in a closet. The status meeting was where I saw Adrienne up close for the first time in 3 years, across a conference table instead of across a church hallway, and I want to tell you, it didn't affect me. But my hands were doing that thing where they get very interested in a notepad they aren't actually writing on. She ran the meeting like she'd been doing it her whole life, which, to be fair, she had. Adrienne was always better at rooms full of people than I was, always the one who could read a table and know exactly which editor needed flattery and which one needed facts. She went around asking each department for their status on the anniversary issue, sharp, specific questions, no wasted time, and when she got to me, she paused for half a second longer than she had with anyone else. "Style desk. Where are we on the cover looks?" "On track," I said, in a voice I did not recognize as mine, a voice that belonged to someone who had never once memorized the exact way this woman took her coffee. "We're finalizing 3 options by Friday." She held my eyes for a beat, then said, "Send them to me directly. Not through the usual channel." A pause. "I want to see your work specifically." The room didn't react, because to the room it sounded like a normal instruction from a new director establishing control. But I heard the specifically the way you hear a word aimed only at you in a crowded restaurant. And across the table, Delphine's pen stopped moving for exactly 1 beat too long. After the meeting, in the hallway, Delphine caught my arm before I could escape toward the elevators. "She singled you out, in front of everyone. That wasn't a boss thing, Ren, that was a thing." I told her it wasn't a thing, that she was establishing she paid attention to every department, that it was a new director move I'd seen a dozen times before at a dozen other magazines. "Sure. And I've seen the way she looked at you when you answered, which was not the way you look at someone whose cover options you're mildly curious about. Delphine has known me for 4 years, and has never once let me get away with underselling my own feelings, which is either the best or worst thing about our friendship depending on the day. And this was very much a worst thing about it day. I didn't have an answer for her, because the truth was, I'd felt it too. The specifically landing somewhere under my ribs I thought I'd sealed off years ago. And admitting that out loud, even to Delphine, even in an empty hallway, felt like handing someone a lit match and asking them to please be careful with the building. So instead, I said the only thing I had left, which was, "I need coffee, and I need you to not bring this up again today." And Delphine, being a good friend and an excellent enabler of denial, let me have exactly that. For exactly the rest of the afternoon, before the emails started coming in. One of them from an address I hadn't seen in 3 years, subject line blank, and my whole stomach dropped before I'd even opened it.
Hi, it's Lena Palla. A quick reminder before we continue. If you like light romance stories with more depth and development than what fits in the videos here on the channel, on my Patreon, there's a complete library of exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. These are different stories with more room to explore the characters and their feelings. The link is in the description. Now, back to the story.
The email with the blank subject line turned out to be nothing. A calendar invite, generated automatically, no message attached. And I hated how disappointed I was, which told me everything about where my head still lived. 3 years, and one supposed engagement-ending text message later. I closed the laptop, drank the coffee Delphine had guilt-tripped me into ordering, and told myself the rest of the week would be normal. It was not normal. It was, in fact, the week I learned exactly how Adrienne intended to run this office. She was, professionally speaking, terrifying. Not in the cartoonish way people whisper about difficult bosses in movies, but in the quieter, more exhausting way of someone who simply expected excellence and said nothing when she got it, only when she didn't. She corrected layouts in red pen like she was diffusing something. She sent one-line notes at 11 p.m. that made grown editors reorganize entire spreads by morning, and by Wednesday, the whole floor had adopted a new habit of checking their phones with visible dread every time it buzzed after 9. In meetings, she was polished, distant, unreadable, exactly the version of her I'd need to survive 6 weeks working underneath, if she'd only stayed that version consistently. I clung to that version like a life raft. It was easier to work for a stranger than to work for someone who used to know the names of my childhood pets. She did not stay that version consistently. It happened on a Thursday, during the kind of afternoon chaos that swallows a fashion office whole 3 weeks before a major issue ships. A sample gone missing, a photographer's flight delayed, 2 editors arguing about a font in the hallway loud enough that the intern pretended to be on a call to escape it. Somewhere in the middle of that, someone spilled an entire cold brew across the sample rack, and for about 4 minutes the whole floor operated on pure adrenaline and shared panic, the specific kind of teamwork that only exists 45 minutes before a shoot has to leave for the studio. In the middle of it, Adrienne walked past my desk, glanced at the mood board I'd been rebuilding for 2 hours, and stopped. "This is good," she said, quiet enough that only I could hear it over the chaos. "Better than good. You always had an eye for restraint other people don't." Then, before I could do anything with that sentence except stand there absorbing it like a physical blow, she added, "Take the afternoon on this. I'll tell the desk it's a priority assignment. Don't let anyone rush you into cutting corners." Nobody else got that. I watched, over the following 10 minutes, as she moved through the bullpen, handling 3 separate crises with the exact same flat, efficient tone she used on everyone, and then circled back to my desk one more time before heading into her office, ostensibly to ask about a shipping timeline, though the shipping timeline took 4 seconds to discuss. And she stayed for 2 more minutes anyway, asking about nothing, filling silence, the way you do with someone you're not ready to stop talking to yet. Delphine caught the whole thing from across the room and found an excuse to walk past my desk approximately 90 seconds later. She gave you an extra afternoon and a pep talk, in front of the entire art department. I told her it was because the work was actually good, that I wasn't imagining favoritism where there was only professional respect, that Adrienne would have said the same thing to anyone whose mood board looked like that. Would she have stood there for 2 extra minutes asking about shipping timelines with anyone else? Delphine asked, and I didn't have an answer, because I'd been keeping count without meaning to. 30 seconds longer with me in the status meeting, an unprompted afternoon off, a compliment delivered like she still remembered exactly which ones used to make my chest go tight. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself people who leave you standing in a church hallway don't get to earn back your trust with mood board compliments and stolen minutes by your desk. And I meant it, mostly. The way you mean things you're trying very hard to believe. But that night, walking to the subway, I caught myself replaying her voice saying restraint other people don't have, and I hated, genuinely, thoroughly hated, how much of me still wanted to hear her say it again. There's a specific kind of memory that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with warning music. It just arrives, uninvited, while you're doing something completely unrelated, like reorganizing a supply cabinet, and suddenly you're not in the supply cabinet anymore. You're somewhere 3 years earlier, and the floor tilts a little before it rights itself again. Mine arrived on a Tuesday, while I was digging through a drawer of extra pens looking for the specific blue one I like, the one that writes without skipping, and I found, tucked behind a stack of unused notebooks, a pen exactly like it, the same brand, the same slightly too thick grip. And my whole chest folded in on itself, because Adrienne used to steal that exact pen from me constantly. Not because she needed a pen. Because stealing my pen was, somehow in the specific grammar of our relationship, a way of saying I want your attention without having to say it directly. She'd take it mid-conversation, click it twice, twirl it between 2 fingers like she was thinking hard about something. And then, 4 minutes later, hand it back without comment, like she hadn't just spent an entire discussion holding a piece of me hostage for no reason, except that she liked watching me pretend to be annoyed about it. I was never actually annoyed. I bought a second one eventually, specifically so she'd have her own to steal, and never told her why, and she never asked, because some things you just understand about a person without needing them explained. We had an entire language like that. Small, stupid, specific things that meant nothing to anyone else and everything to us. The way she'd order for me at restaurants without asking, always getting it right, always somehow knowing I wanted the thing on the menu I hadn't said out loud yet. There was a coffee shop near her old apartment where the barista eventually stopped asking either of us for our order at all, just started making them the second we walked in, and I remember thinking, at the time, that this was what forever was supposed to feel like. Small rituals nobody had to explain. The way I learned to read her silences was its own education. There was a quiet that meant she was working through a problem, chin tucked, eyes somewhere else entirely, and a completely different quiet that meant something was actually wrong. Shoulders pulled in, a stillness that asked to be left alone rather than questioned. I learned the difference within months. It took me considerably longer to learn that her own family apparently never bothered to learn it at all. Not that I knew that yet. Not that anyone had told me there was a family to learn anything about in the first place. I didn't understand back then how rare that kind of fluency actually is. You think everyone gets that with someone eventually. You don't realize, until years later, standing in an office supply cabinet holding a pen that isn't even the same one, just similar enough to trigger the whole memory, that some people go their entire lives without ever being read that completely by anyone, and you had it, and then you didn't. And the not having it anymore is its own specific grief that never fully resolves. I put the pen back in the drawer. I did not take it home. I want that on record too, because there was a version of that Tuesday where I absolutely could have and chose not to, which felt, at the time, like a small private victory over whatever part of me still wanted to keep things that reminded me of her. Delphine asked me at lunch why I seemed distracted, and I told her it was nothing, a work thing, a font decision I couldn't settle on, which was a lie sturdy enough to survive her scrutiny for exactly as long as it took her to notice I'd ordered the same lunch Adrienne used to order for me at our old favorite place. Unprompted, out of habit, without even registering, I'd done it until the words were already out of my mouth to the waiter. "That's not a font thing," Delphine said, and I didn't argue, because there wasn't anything left to argue with. Some backstories don't come out in one dramatic confession over wine. They leak out sideways, through a pen you didn't buy, and a lunch order you didn't mean to make. and by the time you notice what you've revealed, it's already too late to take it back. I went back to work that afternoon and got nothing done, staring at a mood board I'd already approved twice, thinking about a woman who used to know exactly what I wanted before I asked for it, and wondering, for the first time since the meeting 3 weeks ago, what version of her I was actually working for now. The composed director who corrected layouts in red pen, or the one who still, apparently, remembered everything. The announcement came on a Monday, which I've started to think of as the office's designated day for detonating my personal life, delivered by our editor-in-chief with the kind of energy reserved for genuinely good news, which, on paper, it was. Orel's 40th anniversary issue would be capped off with a live gala and runway event, streamed globally, the biggest thing the magazine had done in over a decade, and the entire creative direction of it, looks, staging, casting, everything, would run through exactly 2 people, me and Adrian. I heard my own name paired with hers out loud, in a room full of colleagues, and had to consciously arrange my face into something resembling professional excitement instead of the internal screaming that was actually happening, because being handed the biggest opportunity of my career and being handed 6 uninterrupted weeks of proximity to the woman who left me at the altar are, it turns out, indistinguishable from the outside and completely different on the inside. "This is the one," our editor-in-chief said, looking directly at me in a way that made it clear she'd been paying attention to my work far longer than I'd realized. "That decides who gets the associate director title we've been discussing. I want you 2 building this together, start to finish." 2 seats down, Delphine kicked me under the table hard enough that I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep my expression neutral. The mechanics of it were straightforward enough on paper. Adrian would oversee the overall creative vision. I would execute the looks, casting, and staging details, which meant, in practice, that we would be in the same room, reviewing the same boards, making the same decisions, for hours at a stretch, every single day, for the entire 6 weeks leading up to the show. There would be no more brief hallway encounters I could escape from. There would be no more status meetings I could survive by staying quiet and letting other departments absorb her attention. There would just be Adrian and me, alone in a conference room with the door closed, for 6 weeks, deciding the future of the biggest night of both our careers. I found her in her office after the meeting, mostly because I needed to say something before my nerve gave out, and mostly because if I didn't say it now, I'd spend a week rehearsing it uselessly instead. She looked up when I knocked, and something in her expression shifted the way it had that first day in the all-staff meeting. That 1 second of something underneath the composure, gone as fast as it arrived. "I want to make sure this is professional," I said, which was not remotely what I'd rehearsed, but was, apparently, what came out. "Whatever happened before, I need to know this is just work for you, because it has to be just work for me." She was quiet long enough that I started regretting saying anything at all, and then she said, carefully, like she was choosing each word from a very small, very dangerous selection, "It's the biggest project of the year. I wouldn't have put your name on it if I didn't think you could carry it." A pause. "That's not me avoiding your question. I'm telling you the part I can actually answer right now." I noticed the phrasing, the part I can actually answer right now, and filed it away the way I'd started filing away every strange, careful thing she said, evidence in a case I hadn't decided yet whether I wanted to build. I told her that was fine, that professional was all I was asking for, and left before either of us could complicate the moment further. Delphine was waiting by my desk when I got back, arms crossed, already knowing exactly what had happened without me saying a word. 6 weeks, alone in a room, building the biggest show of the year with the woman who left you at the altar. She said it slowly, like she was testing whether the sentence would collapse under its own weight. It did not collapse. It just sat there, entirely true, entirely terrifying, and entirely the only thing standing between me and the promotion I'd wanted since the day I started at Orel. "I can handle 6 weeks," I said, mostly to convince myself, and Delphine wisely did not point out that I'd said almost the exact same thing about handling one meeting, and one afternoon, and one supply closet memory, and had been wrong every single time. That night, I sat on my kitchen floor with a takeout container I never got around to eating, running the math on it the way you run math on things you already know the answer to, but need to see spelled out anyway. 6 weeks. 2 people. One title I'd wanted since the day I walked into that building as a 24-year-old intern who didn't know a single name in the masthead. And somewhere underneath all of it, one question I wasn't ready to say out loud yet, not even to Delphine, not even to myself in an empty kitchen at 11 p.m. What exactly was I hoping this project would give me back, besides a promotion? I want to take a brief break from the emotional devastation to tell you about the week. Delphine decided the only way to survive watching me pretend I wasn't losing my mind was to start a betting pool, which, I found out 3 days after it started, already had 11 participants and a shared spreadsheet with a tab literally titled Ren and the Ex-Fiancé Boss, Timeline of Inevitable Collapse. I discovered this because someone in the finance department, whom I have never spoken to in my life, made eye contact with me in the elevator and said, completely unprompted, "I've got $20 on week 4, and then got off on his floor before I could ask what week 4 was supposedly going to bring. "You started a betting pool," I said to Delphine, holding my laptop like evidence, having found the spreadsheet open on the shared drive where absolutely anyone could see it, including, theoretically, Adrian, if she ever had reason to open a folder labeled miscellaneous fun stuff, which, mercifully, she did not seem the type to browse casually. There was even a conditional formatting rule on one column that turned cells green the closer a prediction got to the current date, which meant 3 rows were currently glowing an aggressive, accusatory shade of lime. "I started a support system," Delphine said, entirely unbothered, sipping her coffee like she hadn't just implicated half the office in monetizing my personal catastrophe. "People needed an outlet. You've been narrating this situation to me in increasingly unhinged detail for 3 weeks. And frankly, watching you refold the same sweater 4 times while talking about a woman who once ordered your food for you is the best entertainment this building has had since the fire drill where the new intern got stuck in the stairwell." I told her this was objectively insane, and she told me that insane was relative, and that if I wanted the pool shut down, all I had to do was stop making it so easy to bet on. At which point, she pulled up an actual tab in the spreadsheet titled Evidence, which contained, among other things, a time-stamped log of every time Adrienne had lingered at my desk longer than professionally necessary, cross-referenced against a second column titled Ren's Denial Level, 1 to 10. I was, apparently, currently rated a 9. We were interrupted by an actual work emergency, which is the only reason that conversation ended, instead of me formally quitting my job out of secondhand embarrassment. A fitting for the gala's opening look had gone sideways, the sample 2 sizes off from what the designer had promised, and the model was standing in the middle of the studio in a half-pinned dress looking increasingly alarmed, while 3 people argued about whether it could be altered in time or would need to be scrapped entirely 48 hours before the shoot that would put it on camera for the first time. Adrienne arrived within 4 minutes of the first panicked group text, took one look at the situation, and made a decision so fast and so correct, reworking the silhouette on the spot instead of waiting on a replacement sample that would never arrive in time, that the designer actually applauded, out loud, unprompted, which I have never once seen a designer do for anyone at Orel in 3 years. In the chaos of fixing it, she and I ended up crouched on the studio floor together, both reaching for the same pincushion at the same time, hands landing on top of each other for exactly 1 second too long before either of us pulled back, and I swear the entire room went quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when everyone else has noticed something before you fully processed it yourself. Delphine, from across the studio, did not say a single word, which from Delphine is basically a 5-alarm siren, and simply raised her phone slightly, presumably updating the spreadsheet in real time. Adrienne recovered first, standing, brushing off her slacks, announcing to the room that the fitting could resume, voice completely level, professional, unbothered, except for the very faint color still sitting high on her cheekbones, which she did not have 3 minutes earlier, and which I noticed and filed away, the way I'd started filing away everything lately, in a folder I refused to admit was getting uncomfortably full. Later, walking to the subway, Delphine finally spoke. So, week 4's looking generous now. I might move my bet. I told her there was nothing to bet on, that it was a pincushion, that grown professional women reach for the same object all the time without it meaning anything. And Delphine, linking her arm through mine with the smug satisfaction of someone who has just watched their theory confirmed in real time, said only, "Sure, Ren, sure." It happened at 8:30 on a Wednesday, both of us still in the conference room long after everyone else had gone home, surrounded by printed boards for the gala's closing sequence. The kind of late-night quiet that makes people say things they'd never say under fluorescent lights with an audience. I hadn't planned to ask. I want that clear, because I'd spent 3 weeks very deliberately not asking, treating the question like a door I'd nailed shut myself and had no intention of prying back open. But she'd gone quiet for a long stretch, staring at a photo of a dress that looked, in a way I couldn't quite place, like something from the wedding neither of us had ever mentioned out loud, and I heard myself say it before I'd decided to. "Why did you actually leave?" She didn't flinch, which surprised me. She set down her pen. Not my pen. Her own, I noticed, some habits apparently retired. And was quiet long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer at all. Then she said, "My mother got sick. Really sick. Diagnosis the week before the wedding. The kind where the doctors start talking in ranges instead of certainties." A pause. And my father, who has never in his life handled bad news like an adult, decided the only acceptable response was to liquidate everything he could get his hands on to pay for the best specialists money could find, which included a business loan he'd taken out under both our names for the venue and the deposit, and a promise I'd made to help cover it if anything went wrong. I asked her what that had to do with leaving me at the altar, and she said, voice flatter now, like she'd rehearsed this part in her head 100 times, and it still cost her something every time. Because 2 days before the wedding, he told me the only way to make the loan disappear cleanly, without it following either of us for years, was to walk away from the marriage before it existed on paper. If we were never legally married, the debt stayed his and my mother's problem, structured a specific way, and didn't become something you'd inherit by association the second we signed anything, she went on, staring at a spot on the table like it was easier to say to furniture than to me. He asked me to choose between protecting you from a debt you didn't know existed, and marrying you anyway, and watching that debt eventually reach you too. I had about 6 hours to decide, alone, in a hotel bathroom, while a string quartet did a sound check 2 floors down. "You could have told me," I said, and I heard my own voice crack on it in a way I hated. "I would have figured it out with you. That's what marriage is supposed to mean." "I know that now," she said. "I didn't know it then." I was 26 and terrified, and my mother was in a hospital bed 2 states away, and my father made it sound like the only kind thing left to do was disappear cleanly, instead of dragging you into something that might take years to unwind. I told myself leaving without explanation was a gift. I've had 3 years to understand it was actually just cowardice wearing a nicer word. I didn't say anything for a long moment, because there wasn't a version of my next sentence that wouldn't have come out either. As forgiveness, I wasn't ready to give, or anger I wasn't sure I still had the energy for. Instead, I asked the only question that actually mattered. "Is she okay now?" "Your mother." "She's okay," Adrian said, something loosening in her voice for the first time since she'd started talking. "Recovered fully, 2 years ago. The debt took longer to clear than she did." Another pause. I've spent 3 years telling myself I did the right thing the wrong way, and I still don't know if that's true, or if it's just the story I built so I could live with what I did to you. I told her I needed time before I knew what to do with any of it, and she said that was fair, that she wasn't asking for anything, That she'd told me because I'd asked, and because I deserved the truth even 3 years late, and we packed up the boards in silence after that. Not an angry silence, something quieter and more complicated. The kind of silence that comes after a door you thought was welded shut turns out to have had a working handle the entire time. 4 days before the gala, everything that could go wrong decided to go wrong at exactly the same time, which I've since learned is less a coincidence and more a law of nature, specific to live television events with a global stream and a budget large enough to make 3 separate executives personally nervous. It started with the headline sponsor, threatening to pull funding over a scheduling conflict nobody had caught in time, escalated into the lead model's flight getting canceled with no viable rebooking before the show, and somehow, in the middle of all of it, someone in HR forwarded our editor-in-chief an anonymous complaint, alleging that the show's 2 creative leads, meaning Adrienne and me, were engaged in an inappropriate personal relationship that compromised the integrity of the project. I found out about the complaint the same way I find out about most disasters at Orel, which is Delphine materializing at my desk with the specific pale, urgent look she reserves for things that are actually bad, not just dramatic. HR wants to talk to you, both of you, separately. She didn't have to say what it was about. I already knew. The way you know a storm is coming from the particular quality of the air before the first drop hits. The meeting with HR was exactly as mortifying as I'd imagined. A woman named Denise asking careful, procedural questions about the nature of my working relationship with Adrienne. Whether any personal history existed that I hadn't disclosed. Whether I felt any pressure, implicit or explicit, related to my role on the gala. I told the truth, because lying felt both impossible and pointless at that point. Yes, we had a personal history. Yes, I should have disclosed it when the project assignment came through. No, I did not feel pressured. And yes, I understood how the optics looked from the outside. A subordinate and a director who used to be engaged, alone in conference rooms for 6 weeks straight. Denise took careful notes the entire time, nodding in a way that gave nothing away, and asked, near the end, whether I believed the anonymous complaint had come from someone with a genuine concern or someone with a grudge, which was a question I hadn't let myself consider until she asked it out loud. I thought immediately of a junior editor who'd been passed over for the associate director track twice already. Someone who'd made a few too many pointed comments about how certain people seemed to get more attention on this project than others. And I said, honestly, that I didn't know, and that either way, the concern deserved to be taken seriously. Denise informed me, in the careful language HR uses for things that could end careers, that the anonymous complaint would need to be formally investigated, that depending on the outcome, one or both of us could be reassigned off the project days before it launched, and that in the meantime, all direct one-on-one work sessions between Adrienne and me were suspended pending review. I walked out of that meeting into a hallway where Adrienne was waiting for her own turn with Denise, and for one terrible second we just looked at each other, both of us understanding exactly what was about to happen and exactly how much it would cost either of us to fix it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, before disappearing into the office I'd just left. "I should have disclosed this the day they gave us the project. I let my own selfishness put your job at risk, and I need you to know I'll fix it, whatever that takes." The next 2 days were, professionally speaking, some of the worst of my life. Every review, every approval, every decision on a gala that was now 4 days out had to be routed through a third party while the investigation played out, which meant deadlines that had already been tight became nearly impossible, and the whole floor could feel something was wrong, even if most people didn't know exactly what. Delphine ran interference where she could, covering for gaps in the workflow, fielding questions from other departments with a vagueness that bordered on artistry, and refusing, pointedly, to say a single word about the betting pool for the entire 48 hours, which told me more than anything else how seriously she understood the stakes had become. The investigation cleared us both of any implicit misconduct by the second morning, Denise confirming quietly that no policy had actually been broken, that disclosure timing was a procedural lapse rather than a violation, But the decision on whether we'd stay on the project together still hadn't come down from above, which meant the entire office spent 2 full days treating both of us like something fragile that might shatter if handled wrong. On the second night, working late in an empty office because the show was 4 days out, and there was simply no time left to wait politely for a verdict, I found Adrienne alone at her desk, staring at a runway diagram she clearly hadn't looked at in an hour, and something in the exhaustion on her face made every careful boundary I'd built over 3 weeks feel suddenly, dangerously beside the point. "You should go home," I said, standing in the doorway of her office, because it was the reasonable thing to say, the professional thing, the thing a person says when they are trying very hard to remember why they built a boundary in the first place. "I will," she said, not moving. In a minute, she was still staring at the diagram, pen loose in her hand, and when she finally looked up at me, something in her face had gone soft, in a way I hadn't seen since before the wedding that didn't happen. Unguarded in a way 3 years, and a corner office title clearly hadn't managed to fully train out of her. "I keep thinking about what you asked me," she said. "Why I didn't tell you. And I've had a version of the answer ready for 3 years. Something about protecting you. About doing the responsible thing. And it's true. But it's not the whole truth." She set the pen down entirely. "The whole truth is, I was terrified that if I told you what my father was asking me to do, you'd have found a way to fix it anyway. Some plan to marry me and cover the debt together and make it work, because that's who you've always been. And I didn't think I deserved someone willing to do that for me. I left because leaving felt easier than believing I was worth staying for." I didn't say anything for a moment, because that sentence landed somewhere I hadn't braced for it to land, underneath every careful defense I'd built over 3 weeks of telling myself this was strictly professional. "I would have," I said finally, "found a way. You're right about that." I stepped further into the office, close enough now that the distance between us had stopped being about furniture and started being about something else entirely. "But you don't get to decide what I deserve to give you, Adrienne. That was never yours to decide alone." She stood up slowly, and for a long moment, we just stayed like that, close enough to feel the specific quality of shared silence I used to know better than my own name. The kind that isn't empty. The kind that's actually full of everything neither person has said yet. "I don't know how to ask for a second chance after what I did," she said, quiet, careful, like the words cost her something to hand over. "I'm not even sure I have the right to ask." "You don't," I said. "Not yet. Maybe not for a while." I watched something flicker across her face, bracing for the rejection the sentence seemed to promise before I finished it. "But you can start by not disappearing again. That's the only thing I actually need right now. Not an apology. Not a grand gesture. Just stay, this time, even when it's hard." "I can do that," she said, voice breaking slightly on the second word. And something about hearing her voice crack, after 3 years of imagining her as untouchable, composed, unreachable, undid the last careful thread I'd been holding on to. I reached up and touched her face, the way I used to, the way that used to mean I see you, actually you, not the version everyone else gets. And she leaned into it the way she always had, eyes closing for a moment like she'd been waiting 3 years for permission to stop bracing. When she kissed me, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, careful, the kind of kiss that feels like an apology and a promise folded into the same quiet motion. Her hand coming up to rest against my jaw like she was checking. I was actually real. We stood there a long moment after, foreheads close, her thumb tracing an absent, gentle line along my cheek. Neither of us saying anything because there wasn't anything left that needed saying out loud right then. The office lights dimmed automatically around us, the building's energy-saving timer kicking in for the night, and somewhere in that soft, fading light, she pulled me into a slow embrace that felt less like the end of an argument and more like the beginning of something we were finally doing correctly. Her chin resting against my shoulder, my hand at the back of her neck, both of us breathing a little easier than we had in 3 weeks, or maybe 3 years. The next thing I remember clearly is morning. Sunlight cutting through the studio windows at an angle that meant it was later than either of us should have let it get. The gala exactly 2 days away, and Adrian asleep on the office couch beside me, one arm still loosely around my shoulders, looking for the first time since she'd walked back into my life, completely at peace. I lay there a while before waking her, just watching, letting myself believe, for a few quiet minutes, that this part of the story might actually get to stay. The gala happened exactly 2 days later, and if you want the professional summary, it was the single biggest night in Aurel's history, the stream numbers breaking every internal record the marketing team had ever tracked. The sponsor who'd threatened to pull funding sending flowers the next morning with a card that just said, "Glad we stayed," which felt, given everything, uncomfortably on the nose. The HR investigation closed the same week, quietly, with a formal note that no policy violation had occurred, that disclosure had simply happened late rather than not at all, and a mild recommendation that going forward, any personal history between collaborators be flagged at the start of a project rather than 3 weeks in. Adrian handled the paperwork herself, personally, making sure nothing about it would follow me on a review anywhere down the line, which, for a woman who once left the mechanics of a much bigger decision unexplained, felt like a very specific kind of correction. The associate director title went to me, officially, 2 weeks after the gala, announced in a meeting where Delphine sat 2 seats down again, this time not kicking me under the table, just mouthing "told you" with the specific smugness of someone who'd been right about a spreadsheet for over a month and fully intended to collect on it. She did, in fact, collect. The betting pool paid out that Friday, and I found out, to my genuine horror, that the office consensus had settled on week 6, the night before the gala, as the winning timeline, missed by exactly 1 day, a fact Delphine has brought up at least once a week since, usually unprompted, usually while eating something she clearly bought with the winnings. Adrienne and I took it slow after that, deliberately, the way you do when you've already learned what happens when 2 people skip the parts of a relationship where you actually explain things to each other out loud. We started over the way you're supposed to the first time. Dinners where nobody ordered for the other person without asking first. Conversations about her father that were still hard but no longer unspoken. A slow rebuilding of trust that had less to do with grand gestures and more to do with small, boring consistency. Showing up, staying, answering texts, being where she said she'd be. Her mother, when I finally met her properly 6 weeks later, held my hands for a long moment at the door before saying anything at all, studying my face the way people do when they're trying to match a stranger to a story they've heard secondhand for years, and then told me, in the specific tone of someone who has thought about a sentence for a long time before saying it, that she was sorry it had taken her family this long to stop making decisions on my behalf. I told her it was, at this point, mostly water under a very specific bridge, and she laughed, actually laughed, in a way that told me exactly where Adrienne had learned to hide her feelings behind precision for years before finally learning not to. I still work the same desk at Aurel, though the office next to Adrienne's now has my name on the door too, a fact the intern still occasionally stares at when she thinks I'm not looking, clearly having heard some version of the story through the grapevine and finding the ending harder to square with the terrifying new director everyone was warned about that first Monday. Delphine asked me recently, half joking, half not, whether I regretted any of it. The 6 weeks, the investigation, the specific chaos of falling for your boss who happens to be the person who once left you at an altar. And I told her the truth, which is that I regret exactly none of it. Not the version of me who hid in a supply closet, not the version who cried once, quietly, in a bathroom stall over an email that turned out to be nothing. Not even the version who spent 3 weeks pretending a stolen pen didn't mean anything. Because here's what I've learned. In the specific way you learn things only by living through them badly first. Sometimes the person who hurt you worst has also spent longer becoming someone who deserves a second chance than you ever gave them credit for. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying guarded forever. It's letting someone prove, slowly, boringly, consistently, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, ordinary Tuesday by ordinary Tuesday, that this time they're actually going to stay. That's not a dramatic ending. It's just the honest one. And honestly, after everything, it's the only kind I still trust.